Hello everyone, welcome to this tutorial on Cinema 4D, Splines, and NURB objects. This is Pete Merrick with Triplet 3D. Let's jump right into Cinema 4D and we'll get started. So, I have my splines open on the right hand side over here. So, to create a freehand spline, what you're going to do is you could select the freehand spline and you could just start drawing freehand if you have a Wacom tablet. That'll help you out. You can also use a mouse, but it's a lot easier with a Wacom pad. So after you create this spline, you can always go back in point mode, select points, and manipulate the handles, manipulate these things to change the curve of your freehand spline. The Bezier spline, this is probably the most practical and gives you the most control. So with the Bezier spline, you can, what I'm doing is I'm clicking, and then when I click and drag on my second point, I'm actually clicking and dragging the second point, okay? And then I'm clicking and dragging this third point, click and drag the last point, hit enter. And now if I wanted to manipulate these points, I can go back in here, and you'll notice I have these nodes that are coming off of, these handles that are coming off of each node. So I can, if I wanted to change the curvature of this curve, what I would have to do is I select the point, select the move tool, and then I can grab one of these handles and change the curve just like that. Sometimes you want a really sharp edge on one of these points, so what you need to do is grab the move tool and hold down shift. So if you hold down shift, you can actually change that point to a really, you can change that node to a really sharp point. Alright, so the Bezier tool, the Bezier Spline tool, that's probably the most functional out of all these splines. Linear spline, this is probably the simplest one out of all the splines. This just lets you draw straight lines, just like that. So I'll go back in. There's one other thing that I wanted to show you. If you hit the close spline checkbox, it's actually going to close off your spline. Otherwise, it's going to be open-ended, just like that. So that's the linear spline. Then we have a cubic spline. So you just click and drag some points, and the points are going to be right through the spline curve. So if I go to Akima, pretty similar. And B-Spline, this one's a little bit different. What ends up happening is this gives you a curve, but it kind of approximates the points. It's good for drawing like really curvy surfaces. You can still grab these points and come back in here and manipulate these. So those are the spline tools to draw any kind of custom spline. So there's all these other splines down here, like an arc. It's pretty straightforward how this works. So it gives you a quarter of a circle, and you could change the angle of this arc. You could change the radius of this arc, the type of arc. You can go sector, segment, ring. You can continue to change this end angle. Alright, that's the arc spline, circle spline, also pretty straightforward. We could change the radius of this. If we wanted to make it an ellipse, we check ellipse, and then we get two radiuses over here. So then you can just change the size of that radius. Helix, we'll go into plane, we'll go I'll go XZ plane. And the way that this one works, we have a start radius, where we want it to start, the height, and the end angle. So if we wanted to have more twist into this thing, we would just increase the end angle, and that's pretty much how that one works. We have a star. We can control the number of points on the star. A lot of points. We have an inner radius function and an outer radius function. That's the star spline. A couple other ones. Text tool. Let's just go in here and type some text. Hello. The way that we change the font is right here. We have this little font drop-down menu. We could change the font. We can also change the horizontal spacing. That's the text spline. And the other ones are pretty straightforward as well. We'll just go to the flower. We have an inner radius, outer radius. So you can make some pretty cool shapes really quickly. So if you have one of these parametric splines, I guess you could call it, that you just created, what you're going to notice is you can't access the points right now. So if you wanted to access these points, what you'd have to do is make it editable. So let's come up here, make it editable. Then we can jump into one of our orthographic views, like the front view. And I can grab some of these points and start manipulating those. So you have to make those editable before you can access the points. Alright, so that's a basic rundown of the splines and how they work. One of the things that you'll notice is right now we have this flower spline created, but if I take a render, actually nothing shows up. So that's where the NURBS objects come in. So I'll just grab these NURBS, undock it. So I have my NURBS. I'm going to put it right in here where you can see it. So here's all the NURBS objects. And let's just resize the space. So let me just demonstrate how these work. So the HyperNURBS, that's typically used with like a some sort of parametric primitive. So if we have a cube and I use a HyperNURBS with a cube, what I need to do is I take the cube and I'll drop it right into the HyperNURBS until we see this arrow. That means it's going to be a child of the HyperNURBS. And what that does is it literally rounds out all the corners. So if you have some sort of sharp geometry, what you can do is you can use a HyperNURBS and make it really nice and round and smooth. Alright, so we'll go to the Extrude NURBS now. So let's just say I have a end side spline. Again, I'm going to take a render and nothing happens. So we need to put this spline with some sort of NURBS object. So I'm going to create an Extrude NURBS and make this a child of the Extrude NURBS. And now when I click on the Extrude NURBS, I have all these functions over here in the Attributes Manager. So now I can make this a little bit deeper. I can go into caps, add a fillet cap to both sides, and we can also control the size of this cap. Let's make them both the same, and I can control the number of steps. So you'll notice, let's go back, make this one step right here. So if I take a render, I get a really sharp edge on this thing, but if I increase the number of steps, what ends up happening is this starts to round out. So if I compare these last two renders, that's what happens with these steps. So that's how you control the roundness. And you also had fillet types. You can do a linear fillet type, then these steps don't really matter. If you just want a linear fillet, I'll just leave it at 5 for right now. Just to demonstrate these other ones. So we have convex, concave, and just notice how that fillet cap changes by changing those fillet types. Half circle. You have some 1 step, 2 steps. So just play around with those. Pretty cool. So that's the Extrude NURBS. The next thing I want to show you is the Lathe NURBS. Let's say, for instance, you're creating a cup or a vase or something like that. What you're going to need a profile. So let's go into our Bezier tool and let's just unselect the Lathe NURBS. And I'm going to create a really quick profile for my vase. Let's say that's the profile. Hit enter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back in here real quick and just kind of tweak this profile. So I selected this point. I'm holding down shift with the move tool selected, and I just grabbed one of these sides and I want to make that really sharp. I'm going to grab this and just kind of push it over. Alright, I'm going to grab this one, sort of push it up a little bit, maybe rotate it, and take this one, kind of push it up a little bit, maybe out. Okay, so now I have my spline profile, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the spline and I'm going to make it a child of the Lathe NURBS, and right away we get this object that looks kind of like a vase. And if we're not happy with the profile, we can always come back into the spline in point mode and select one of these points, and we can go back in and change the profile of our actual Lathe NURBS object. One of the things you might notice, like on the bottom right here, we have these weird rings that are happening, and the reason that is that this point is not exactly in the center of the 3D environment. It's kind of off a little bit. So what we'll do is we'll come into our coordinates manager right down here on the bottom, and we'll just zero out all these parameters for position, hit apply. And now when we go back into the perspective view, see those little weird circles are gone. So that's how the Lathe NURBS works. Now we're going to go into the sweep NURBS, and for the sweep NURBS what we need is a path and also a profile. So I'm going to create a Bezier curve. I go into my top view and just create a really nice curve, something like this. And there we go, just like that. All right, so now we have our path. I'm going to create a circle, decrease the radius of the circle, and I'm going to take both the circle and the spline, and I'm going to drop them both into the sweep NURBS. Now the sweep NURBS, you really have to be careful on what object's on top. So this circle is sweeping around the spline, but if I change the direction of the position of these, see what happens? That's not what we want. So I'll take the circle and put it up here. All right. Another cool feature of the sweep NURBS is we can actually change the end scale. So right now this profile of this circle is at 100% sweeping across. So if I wanted the end to be really thin, all I need to do is change the end scale. And this also comes in handy when you're animating. So if you wanted to take the end growth, you could just push that down to 0 and you can animate this end growth parameter so this grows. If you wanted to change the profile of the spline, let's just create a new spline. We'll take a flower, resize it. So I'm going to take this circle, I'm going to take it out of the sweep NURBS, and I'm going to replace it with the flower. Alright, so that's what we have so far. And I'm going to change my spline a little bit. I'll grab my first point and just kind of push it out slightly. Something like that. So let's delete our circle. We'll go back into the sweep NURBS. Another thing that you can do with the sweep NURBS, right down here in the Objects tab, there's a little icon called Details. So this will let you control the scale with this little curve right here. So you can totally control how that profile looks right now. You can also control the rotation of this. So now if we went back and we animated the end growth parameter, that's what it looks like, sort of like it's twisting coming into the scene. Or we could put this down to 0 and we can animate the start growth so it's growing out that way. So the sweep NURBS is a pretty powerful little tool. Alright, so that's the basic rundown of splines and NURBS objects. Again, this is Pete Merrick with Triplet 3D. Hope you enjoyed this lesson, and thanks for watching.